We grade the first week of the Baltimore Ravens 2022 free agency with a very special guest next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we've returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts of your car wherever you need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. We're back here on a Taco Tuesday, as the Ravens have now gone through 1 week of 2022 free agency. And here to talk with me about that and more here today is our Taco Tuesday guest, Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. Spencer, we were sitting here talking last week. The Ravens had just signed Zadarius Smith, and now the Ravens do not have Zadarius Smith anymore. They have lost a couple of guys. They've also signed a few more. How are you doing today?
Doing quite well. Yeah, it was an interesting situation. I thought that the amount of money there made it seem like maybe Zadarius Smith was willing to, bet on himself and prove, he thought he was feeling good about where he was from an injury standpoint. And maybe that's why that total was a little lower. And then he sees a couple guys like Chandler Jones, who's 32, and sees Von Miller as well, go get a little bit more money there, and ultimately ends up deciding to rein things back in, tell his agent the ship's over, and let's go back to it. Now Zadarius Smith is in the process of visiting the Vikings and went as far as to tweet out, "Meet me at the quarterback," the old slogan of the Purple People Eaters, dating back to the dominant pass rushing days of Minnesota Vikings past. So it would be an interesting turn of events for Packers fans watching him. Oh yeah, we love Zadarius. Goes back to his old team. Thank you so much. We got Rashawn Gary, and then suddenly he's sacking Aaron Rodgers. So a little flip of the script on the Ravens, little flip of the script on the Packers, and we'll see if he ends up signing there ultimately, but feels like they've got a good shot.
Yeah, there's been some flipping of the script in recent years with the Ravens, with Ryan Grant, Michael Brockers, and now Zadarius Smith. Now, some of those situations aren't like the others, but yeah, it's crazy to think about how in such a short amount of time things shifted like that, where it's Marcus Williams and Zadarius Smith coming in to help this Ravens defense. And now it's just Marcus Williams. There is Michael Pierce, though, and that's in a good addition. It's not a Zadarius Smith level signing, but I still think it is a solid addition there. But Spencer, there were a couple of moves made that related to the Ravens yesterday. One of them being the re-signing of fullback Patrick Ricard to a 3-year deal. The reports are that it's second highest paid fullback, money behind former Raven Kyle Juszczyk. And there's been a lot of split in the Ravens fan base as to whether this was a good signing or not to, I guess, invest that amount of money, which is not a huge amount of money, into a fullback. Spencer, are you on board with this signing based off of what Ricard brings to this offense? Because some positions, they mean more to certain teams, and the fullback position means a lot to the Ravens.
Yeah, I personally am more privy to fullbacks in general, number one, because the reason I enjoy football so much is because it's a violent sport, and there are very few positions and individually players, speaking of one Mr. Patrick Ricard, that bring so much fun violence to the offensive side of the football, especially doing so as a non-offensive lineman, someone who made plays when you needed them against the Tennessee Titans in the wild card round, diving left and right for some low balls and helping the Ravens move down the field, and being that physical factor, one of the few tone-setting enforcers they've had up front that's been able to really impose his will upon defensive players. And overall, I think there's an overarching conversation of people want to see the Ravens throw the ball more and use wide receivers more. Sure, I just, I'm looking for quality. I also find offenses that are balanced tend to be, the best. I like to look at the Packers offense, an offense that can go 22 personnel or 21 personnel or 12 personnel, and can also go 11 personnel. So I think being able to be multiple on both sides of the football, in life and everything, being able to attack an opponent's weakness when you see something on tape. Being able to do so is very important. And for Ricard to, and I understand people want catches and touchdowns more so. I don't know about for $3 million what you're going to get in that for a wide receiver, but ultimately there are very few players that can execute the variety in combination of assignments and blocks that Pat Ricard can ultimately. Able to help out along the 6 and 7 man protections when the offensive line was ailing a little bit. So to me, you want to talk about getting value with players that you sign. And a lot of people seem to think that maybe, signing Pat Ricard for $3 million precludes you from getting, a $20 million player, which I don't think is quite how it works. But ultimately, someone that's just going to be able to be that versatile piece within your offense and allow you to line up in different ways, different places, and go make plays. So talking about getting value from the signing, over the cap valued him at about $4.2 million last year, and that includes some missed games as well. So I think that the Ravens are still in an area where they can get a little bit of value. I do think it's of note as well. I'm a big Pat Ricard fan myself. I have his jersey. I love fullbacks. Like I said, I love violence, the people's fullback himself, Pat Ricard, but did have a little bit of a cleanup surgery last year. I think that's kind of why we saw that Ben Mason pick, which was baffling at the time and only continues to be more baffling. It was a 5th round pick, so the likelihood of hitting on an impact player there was probably pretty low anyway, but taking a second fullback was always funny ultimately. But the Ravens did a nice job there retaining Pat Ricard. You see James Prochet, Rashad Bateman, Patrick Queen, Ronnie Stanley. Everybody loves Pat in the locker room. Also, and it's not something you maybe want to pay a ton for, but just added bonus. Go watch Devin Duvernay's returns with Pat Ricard active and as his up man, or the lead back there, whatever you want to call it, and then go watch without. And there is quite a difference of the ferocity that R4 or an L5 or an L3 will come down the field and try to go attack Devin Duvernay with when Pat Ricard's leading the way. The way he seals things and is able to clear an alley was really fun. So you're getting a key special teams player. You're getting someone that can line up at tight end. You're getting someone that can line up in the backfield, come in motion, be all across your formation, executing different blocks. And hey, was able to make some clutch catches at times, go move the chains here and there. So even had Tyreek Hill at one point tweet out during the Ravens-Titans wild card game from 2021 and say something along the lines of, I've never seen a 300-pound man move that way. So I think that's the best way to put Pat Ricard. You see Brian Baldinger putting breakdowns of him just leveling guys, putting them flat on their back. And I enjoy that very much so. So for me, I find the entertainment value 10 out of 10. I find the deal to be maybe like a 6 or 7 out of 10, probably getting about even value for what you pay. And I'm happy to see a key part in their Ravens offense back that is so multiple and someone who can do things on special teams and just provides an extra little spark. And in the world of positional value and things of that nature, to extrapolate further, when teams are getting towards a too high light box world and you can go bring in a 300-pound fullback that can really go make blocks in space, it can dictate personnel and force a team to go put linebackers on the field. And then you're able to take advantage. You can spread it out. You can condense it and force linebackers to be really worried about who's coming through on those ISO lead blocks and reading their keys and making sure and setting up some successful play action and things of that nature. And does it work out every time? No, but I just think the idea that 22 personnel or 12 personnel or 21 personnel can't be successful as opposed to 11 personnel is a little bit funny. And I just think there's more nuance to it.
Right. Ricard fits what they do right now. And I think that for what he brings, he posted the whole thing about he's not just a fullback. He does a lot in a lot of different roles, and he does. He lines up all over the field. And should Patrick Ricard be the #1 receiver on the Ravens? No, but it's not like he was running a ton of routes anyway. I think some people are concerned about, oh, well, he's going to be lined up in the slot and running routes out of the slot and taking snaps away from Devin Duvernay and James Prochet, when in reality, sometimes, yeah, he's on the field in certain situations where, maybe you'd like to have a different player out there, but he also does a lot in those situations to the point where it values him or values the Ravens to have him on the field. But Spencer, the Ravens also losing a player in inside linebacker Chris Board, reportedly signing with the Detroit Lions. Now, losing Anthony Levine Sr. and Chris Board in the same offseason, those are two big special teams guys that the Ravens have relied on for a long time, all things considered, Levine more than Board. But the Ravens have been good at finding those high value special teams players at low cost. Do you feel like, though, with the Ravens losing two, arguably their two best special teams players in a short amount of time here, that there could be a bit of an adjustment period for the new guys coming in, whether it's Christian Welch or whoever? Or do you think they'll be okay on special teams?
Well, Anthony Levine's your special teams captain for quite some time, but I do think Tony Jefferson is going to step into that role and be able to provide that same sort of leadership, that same sort of accountability, and put in that same effort. I think he had a pretty close relationship with Anthony Levine and appreciates the Ravens bringing him back and wants to kind of carry the torch, so to speak, or take the torch from Anthony Levine. Chris Board was a really good special teamer, really, really, really outstanding in all four phases of special teams. And it's a little bit tough to replace, but they've had a knack, like you said, for finding those guys. Board really had a great feel for it. We've seen Welch make plays already. So could there be a little bit of drop-off? Sure, but I don't think it's going to be substantial in a way that you're going to think, wow, I can't believe Chris Board's not there anymore or anything of the sort. So they do a great job bringing in special teamers. Guy like Tylan Wallace even, who they stick at gunner and is splitting double teams and able to make a ton of plays. So I think they just have a really good process in place. And when they do get someone like that they can have on a vet minimum, they really enjoy doing it. So Board, I think, is a fun signing for a Detroit team that's rebuilding and someone who's going to give maximum effort and be able to instill some of those special teams kind of acumen ultimately. But I think the Ravens could, maybe see a little tiny bit of a drop off, maybe see a couple more returns squeak through, but they're going to get right to the process of bringing in those UDFAs and those day 2, day 3 rookies, getting them integrated and getting them to go hunt guys down. So I think the Ravens always do a great job finding it, but they also have had Anthony Levine for a really long time. So I think it's a fun conversation, and we'll see who emerges from this next generation of Ravens special teams players.
Oh, yeah. And Board's defensive snaps went up over the past couple of seasons, too. So we had a bit of a role there as well. And yeah, I agree, Spencer. I think there could be a tiny bit of a drop off, but not this like drastic dip where all of a sudden you have like a bottom 5 special teams unit. The Ravens, they value that part of their game probably more than almost any other team in the NFL does. And they like bringing in those guys. You can go back to Brennan Imendejo, Corey Graham. They signed some of these veteran guys as well to fill those voids, but I feel like they have enough on their roster right now. And you mentioned the UDFAs as well to come in, make impacts there to soften the blows of losing 2 special teams leaders in Levine and Board. We'll head into our first break here, though. When we get back on Locked On Ravens, we'll be diving into some grades for the Ravens 2022 free agency through 1 week, so stay tuned for that. So we still have a lot to talk about on Locked On Ravens. But first, let me tell you a bit about Bet Online. And for my basketball college brackets, March Madness, I'm out. Well, not technically because Gonzaga's still in it, but I had Illinois in the finals. And I went a little bit upset heavy, and it did not work out for me. And for all the latest college basketball odds, even NBA, if you're looking to bet on the Nuggets, who you might not want to do that right now. They have a tough schedule coming up. They're not playing well. Be sure to go to betonline.net. It's the #1 source for all your sports betting needs. And it's not just basketball either. There's hockey, UFC, live betting, and your favorite Vegas casino games. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Bet Online, where the game starts. We're back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Spencer Schultz. And thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day. Make sure you're following Locked On NFL, Locked On Experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. But Spencer, the Ravens have made some moves, some pretty big ones at that during this first week of free agency. And it feels like they have improved their roster based off of where it was in 2021. Obviously, the big fish in this whole thing has been Marcus Williams, the 5-year, $70 million man who should come in, make a huge impact as a player that the Ravens have really needed in their back end ever since Earl Thomas left. And so I wanted to, before we get to final grades at the end of this segment, I did want to get into a couple of questions with you about these guys who they have brought in. So with Williams and Michael Pierce and Morgan Moses, you can even throw Patrick Ricard in there if you want to. Which one of those guys so far are you most excited to see on the field for the Ravens in 2022?
Oh, it's certainly got to be Marcus Williams, a young, profile, rangy, playmaking free safety that has outstanding ball production, is consistent, durable, and brings something that the Ravens tried to have with Earl Thomas. We saw great success with it. I think it allows Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey to play a certain leverage dictating style of coverage, and ultimately is just going to unlock a lot for what the Ravens can do defensively. Makes you a lot more confident in your middle of the field close coverages, and just generally having diverse coverage tendencies, or I guess lack of tendencies ultimately, being able to be an amoeba and sort of a flubber that can form and congeal into any shape that you need to. But ultimately able to stick him on the roof and trust him to shade the right way and know that you can kind of shade and dictate who is and is not getting thrown to a certain degree as well is going to be really exciting. So Marcus Williams, someone who's a consistent tackler. I think that, just generally times and plays with rhythm and how he approaches and closes and drives on the football when targeted or when he sees where the target is going to emerge. And just a really exciting signing overall for now, for later, and everything in between. I think he's going to bring a lot of intelligence from that Saints system and some insight into some pretty curious things. And it's going to be a fun little storyline about coming from a defense that was able to thwart Tom Brady a couple times to playing Tom Brady again this year. So Marcus Williams, for me, the big name signing, the big money signing, the big ticket, whatever you want to call it, is going to be the most exciting one for me.
Yeah, Brady struggled against that Saints defense in 2021. So I'm excited to see that matchup too. It's Marcus Williams for me also. I mean, he just balances out this unit, the secondary, where Deshaun Elliott played very well for the Ravens, but I just feel like, again, they needed that true deep half of the field ball hawking guy who can hold his own. You can play him in single high, and he covers a lot of ground. He can hit also, and he's one of the best up-and-coming safeties in this league. You get him on for his caliber of play, his age, his potential to still improve. You get him on a relatively good deal, and it's just a matter of, how he can fit in with this team. I think he'll fit in seamlessly, though. But Spencer, so taking out Marcus Williams from the equation here, let's narrow it down just to Morgan Moses and Michael Pierce to talk a bit about those two. Which one of those guys do you think has the bigger impact in Baltimore in 2022? Because the Ravens, they've needed a right tackle now, and it seems like Moses will be that guy for them week one, barring something unforeseen. But Michael Pierce should provide the Ravens with a run-stuffing presence who can get a little interior pass rush as well. So out of those two, Moses and Pierce, do you feel like one will have a bigger impact for the team in 2022?
Yeah, I certainly think Morgan Moses, coming in, being your full-time right tackle is going to be a pretty permanent solution for the time being to a question mark now has an answer. It's someone who's consistent, someone who's durable, someone who uses their length well, can be a factor in the run game and the pass game. So for me, it's really Morgan Moses, the one that stands on his head and is going to provide that value.
Yeah, I agree. And with the way that the Ravens offensive line, especially the bookends, performed last season, it seemed like, especially towards the end of the year, it was whoever was back there, whether it was Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, Josh Johnson, the ball was snapped and the two edge guys were just already in the backfield. And the quarterbacks having to get out of the pocket, scramble for their lives, go through their reads quickly, and it was just a disaster. So to have a player like that, hopefully on the opposite side of a player like a healthy Ronnie Stanley, knock on wood, that is a significant upgrade from what the Ravens were working for last year. And it's not like Patrick Ricard played bad, but as I've said before, Ricard is a super sub to me. He is the super sixth man who can come in, play off five positions at a high level. I'd rather have him there. And obviously there's been speculation as to whether he will play center in 2022, but I think that's his role for me. But Spencer, speaking of a full grade from you for the 2022 offseason through 1 week for the Ravens, obviously the Zadarius Smith situation kind of was a bit disheartening, all things considered. That, you think the Ravens have him, then they don't have him, then he's going to Minnesota. But I still think they've done a lot to improve this roster so far. It doesn't seem like they're done. I'd be pretty shocked if they were. But with the signings of Williams and Pierce and Moses, the re-signing of Ricard, and not losing a ton of talent relatively, Bradley Bozeman probably being the biggest guy they lost alongside Anthony Averett, what would you give this Ravens team as a grade for their 2022 offseason and free agency here through 1 week?
Through 1 week, I think I'll just give it a solid B. They went out, found a young, promising player, got him to a non-market setting or really top-of-market deal. They gave themselves some long-term flexibility. They gave themselves the immediate ability to still have some cap space and wiggle room while making a major signing. I think Williams, I generally just lean towards defensive free agents being more successful. I think it's a little bit easier to step into a defense and step into, the defenses. There are only so many differences ultimately in coverages. There's verbiage and language and things that are different, and definitely some different things, but it just feels like it's more translatable than when you find a successful defender that has somewhat scheme versatile skills, that they're going to step in and be able to be a positive contributor. So I also think they signed him to a value where you can still maybe get value, where maybe if he accounts for 13 million on your cap, let's say 1 year, you might get 15 or 16 million dollars worth of play out of him, relative to his peers and to the market. So I think there's the ability for value. I think there's flexibility. I think it's a talented player and all of those things. Then, of course, signing Morgan Moses just answers a question. You have a right tackle. He's durable. He's solid. He's not a world beater. He's not someone who's going to go eliminate Von Miller or, shut down Joey Bosa alone on an island for 4 quarters. But he's solid, and he can win against those guys pretty consistently. He'll lose here and there, but again, plays with length, is a positive contributor in the run game, and you know what you're getting. A proven, reliable veteran. Other than that, Ricard signing, I would prefer to have him back than not. Again, I think it's kind of even money, so call that one a C, just because it's even. It's 1-to-1. It's average. You're probably not going to get a ton of value. You could have afforded to lose him. You also like to have him, so that one's fine. And then Michael Pierce. To me, Michael Pierce, I like that they didn't overspend on him, it felt like, ultimately. But, a guy who's had some troubles, opted out 1 year, had trouble getting to the right weight back, if we recall, back to when he was with the Ravens, and being able to pass his conditioning test, things of that nature. A nice nose tackle, can flash against as a pass rusher here and there. Ravens love nose tackles. They're going to have one within their defense. Somebody's got to control the A-gap. Michael Pierce is fine there. Wanted to see maybe someone younger that has a little bit more pass rushing upside, but it's not, they just spent $47 million on Michael Pierce. They gave him a pretty minor deal where you can probably get out of it in year 2 or year 3 at the worst case if you need to. And he's probably going to be a nice contributor for you. And maybe you do find someone else there. Maybe you do draft a nose tackle in a very deep nose tackle class. But regardless, what makes this not an A is just not, finding another impact player somewhere. You still have answers at center. I think, JC Tretter would make this an A. Finding even maybe, a Derek Barnett could make this a B+ or someone just to allow you to draft a little bit more freely and ensure that you have some edge rushing presence. I do think that the Ravens are slated to have Rasheem Green from the Seattle Seahawks go to visit the Ravens today as you're listening to this. So I think he's an interesting piece that could be a Jihad Ward type rotational player. So someone like that could make a little bit of sense. You can shore some things up, but I do like the Ravens approach that there was no 1-year signings. They didn't waste their cap space by essentially forcing the entirety of a 1-year salary on the cap in 2022. Signing Marcus Williams to a 5-year deal instead of a 3-year deal allows you to sign Ricard and a Pierce probably and have them on your cap this year. So the ancillary moves are made capable by the fact that Morgan Moses was a 3-year deal and not a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, and vice versa. So I like that aspect of it. They didn't have 2 headliners. They didn't take themselves over the top relative to the rest of the AFC or anything like that. But independently, they went and found a free safety. They went and found a right tackle. Both of those are proven commodities on value capable deals. So I like those. Ricard and Pierce don't really move the needle for me a ton, but they don't really, I don't find huge detriment or loss there either. So a solid B for me.
Yeah, I'm in the B minus-ish category. I mean, there's not a signing that they've made where I'm like, oh, why did they do that? Like, that's such a bad move. Like, all the signings I've liked that they've made, they also haven't necessarily done, like enough to round out their roster. Like, do I think they've had a good offseason so far? Yes. But do I think they should do more? As you talked about, Spencer, they have answers in free. I think Tretter is a home run A+ move for them. He's a better player than Bozeman. He does a lot and could do a lot for this Ravens team. And, people have been clamoring for Bobby Wagner. If that's the route they want to go, there are a couple veteran cornerback options that can complement potentially a Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley, if they're available at 14. They have options to go into the draft now and have a bit more clarity as to, all right, we need this, let's go get this. If that's what they're saying to themselves, they love the best player available strategy, and I could see them taking a multitude of positions right now, but with the value they got on Williams, with the depth they've gotten with Pierce, and obviously bringing Ricard back, and with Moses having a good option at right tackle, I think it's been a fine offseason for them. I'm not looking at this and saying that they haven't improved themselves. I think they have, and that's the ultimate goal. We'll make it back here on our final segment. We'll talk about how the rest of the AFC has improved and whether that has changed perception on the Ravens offseason so far. So be sure to stay tuned for that. A ton still left to talk about. But first, let's talk a bit about Rock Auto. And cars can be tricky sometimes. There are ever-increasing numbers of makes and models. And so local chain auto parts stores, they sometimes don't have all the parts you need, and there can be intimidating questions. So don't wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer. Just go to rockauto.com. You have computers to access rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You can save a bunch of time and money too. Rock Auto is a family business, so they've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and the prices are also very, very low. They have everything you need, such as brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go to rockauto.com right now. See other parts available for your car or truck. Just write Locked On, and they're how you heard about us back so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back, our final segment here of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Spencer Schultz. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be answering your mailbag questions, so be sure to submit those under the tweet I did put out on Monday evening. But make sure your second listen is Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. But Spencer, as we talked about the Ravens, they've improved. They've signed quality free agents. But the rest of the AFC, alongside the Ravens, it has been an arms race. Multiple teams acquiring star quarterbacks, other players, stars like Khalil Mack to the Los Angeles Chargers. This has been a talent shift almost to where the NFC talent's coming over to the AFC. Teams are getting better. Guys are signing with AFC teams. And there are a couple of juggernauts that have been formed. And I think for the Ravens and what they have done, they, with the Marcus Williams signing, improved that position drastically. But Zadarius Smith comes in, then he doesn't. And with all the other teams making these moves and the Ravens technically kind of losing out on one of those star moves, it seems like the perception of the offseason has been, it's been fine, but they need to do so much more. And so they're losing the offseason, essentially. That's what I've seen from some people. Do you feel like the arms race, the big moves in the AFC has changed the perception of what this team has done and how technically solid this offseason has been for the Ravens so far?
First of all, I remove quarterbacks from that. The Ravens aren't in the quarterback market. So talking about a Russell Wilson as why the Ravens aren't doing a good job doesn't really make sense to me. Talking about a Deshaun Watson doesn't really make sense to me. You want to be the best team that you can be. So you want to be able to make moves that are for the short term and the long term. I think in Morgan Moses and Marcus Williams, you accomplished that. Could they do more? Yeah, they can always do more. They could have given Zadarius Smith, he could have made his fourth revision and you could have given it to him, to which point you're probably getting, again, it's about value. So let's say they end up giving Zadarius Smith $16 million a year, and then you get $11 million of production from him. I'm not a fan of I want the Kelly Blue Book or under, ultimately. I want even money or I want a deal on it. So in that sense, I think they've done a nice job. There's still the capacity to make more moves. There's still the capacity to seek trades. There is a possibility that they get clarity on returning injuries and where they do need to make a power move and who becomes available. They still have the flexibility. They have not needed to restructure a Marlon Humphrey yet to free up a $7 million to make a cap hit for another Marcus Williams type deal or something of the sort. We could see that. They could get clarity on injuries. Marcus Peters could not be rehabbing well, or Ronnie Stanley or something of the sort. And they say, oh, well, we need to make a move. We need to go offer a 2023 second-round pick right now to go get Xavier Howard or to go get, hypothetical big play defensive player or hypothetical wide receiver. So all of those things are still in the realm of possibility, but relative to the AFC, the Chargers definitely made a big play for Khalil Mack and go sign J.C. Jackson. But at the same time, they didn't have a lot of talent overall in their roster, relative. They have a couple guys, Joey Bosa, Derwin James. Overall, defensively, not a ton otherwise. So they had cap space. They have a quarterback on a rookie contract. They did a nice job there. But I think, it goes back to kind of failing to remember that in a period of about 20 months, the Ravens acquired Earl Thomas, Calais Campbell, Marcus Peters, and Yannick Ngakoue. So they've made big moves. And I think a lot of people retort to that, well, not offensively. And again, I just tend to think that buying defensive players works more often. So I'm in that wheelhouse. But sure, maybe the Ravens could have traded for Stephon Diggs, and then you have Stephon Diggs, Marquise Brown, and Mark Andrews, and that's a really great trio. And you're paying top dollar for Stephon Diggs, you're paying top dollar for Mark Andrews, and maybe you end up letting Hollywood Brown go after a 5th year or figure something else out. So those things are all great possibilities. I think that when you feel you're one piece away, you have to make that one move. At the same time, the Ravens were in a good spot last year. They beat the Chiefs. They're first in the AFC despite XYZ players missing, and feel like, they can beat any team. They're well coached. They're disciplined. They're getting guys back. They need to be healthier. They bring in a new athletic trainer, head of training to try and shore that situation up. Maybe steal some thunder from the Titans, who can go draft Caleb Farley and Jeffrey Simmons and have AJ Brown with bad knee situations and have all of them return to form. So, that's really the two biggest dominoes that need to fall in order to make a plethora of moves to put yourselves over the top are, number one, can Ronnie Stanley play football at a relatively high level again on a $100 million contract? And number two, Lamar Jackson's extension. I still am in the camp of speculating that I think it will be done. I think there's a pretty much 0% chance Lamar Jackson ends up elsewhere, does not get an extension from the Ravens. But when that falls, then that opens up the wormhole to the rest of the moves that you can make. You have him on a cheap hit. You know what his cap hit is going to be. You know how you can kind of spend and allocate your capital immediately afterwards. So once you have those two things solidified, do we need to move on from Ronnie Stanley next year? Or is he going to play at a Pro Bowl, maybe plus level again? Once you know those things, it allows you to open up, seek more aggressive deals. It feels like, especially on the offensive side of the football, Ronnie Stanley, for instance, I think the Ravens can take on $10 million in dead cap while also adding $12 million to their books by releasing him with a post-June 1 designation next offseason in 2023. So to me, those are the questions right now. Marcus Peters coming back from an ACL. So there's just some question marks to some expensive players and some pretty integral players to your success. So with that, I think it's good to keep in mind. And ultimately, I like the Morgan Moses signing. Bradley Bozeman goes elsewhere. The Ravens do have Pat McCary, who's played a serviceable level of center before. There is a JC Treader out there. There are a couple draftable centers that I think could come in and play day one. So give Lamar Jackson protection. You have J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, both also question marks coming back. You have arguably the top tight end in the NFL, especially as a receiver. You've got a couple playmakers, some younger receivers, and a boatload of draft picks. And it feels like give Lamar Jackson protection, have your weapons be healthy, and you can probably beat any team with a more consistent defense that limits big plays. Now that you have a big play safety or a deep limiting safety that can take away the deep middle. So I think the Ravens could always make another move. The Rams took it over the top. They had Aaron Donald, a generational talent, a Hall of Famer that opens things up for other guys. They go and add Von Miller. They had all of those certainties in place. They are trying to win a Super Bowl actively that season. And with that, I will say, the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Raiders, the Browns, the Bengals, the Bills, all of these teams in the AFC that are a part of this quote-unquote arms race this year. So let's say you go make all of those moves and play in a really hard division and don't win your division, but you make the playoffs and then have to play the Chiefs and then the Bills or something like that. You could be really good, go make another A+ move, go acquire DK Metcalf, let's say from the Seahawks, and make the big move, do all of the good things, and you could still end up like the Bills did last year, losing in a shootout where you're playing another team that has also gone all in. So to me, and Ravens fans hate hearing this, but with those uncertainties that we're probably not going to know until, the extension for Jackson happens or the Ronnie Stanley injury situation clears up, it looks like next year is a really great time to make those aggressive moves, especially with a Lamar Jackson extension and the clarity of Ronnie Stanley. So if you can press your luck with a balanced team, making good long-term decisions in terms of personnel, then you can maybe go surprise teams in the playoffs, go on a little run. The Bengals were a 10-win team with a bad offensive line. They had some great players around it. They made a run, made it to the Super Bowl. who's to say the Ravens can't be in that situation? Football is an oblong leather thing that makes weird bounces and requires a lot of luck. But at the same time, I think next year presents a real opportunity for the Ravens to dip into the fact that the Josh Allens of the world, the Deshaun Watsons of the world, the Pat Mahomes of the world are going to have really big cap hits. Lamar Jackson on an extension won't have a big cap hit, and you can buy. And maybe that's the year to go all in a little more so. But everybody wants to see it now and today and immediately and instant gratification. So I think they're making themselves better and making good long-term investments and trying to better themselves as a football team. And to be desperate and reactionary fails. And it feels like maybe even Earl Thomas to a degree. The Browns acquired Odell Beckham. Guess what? The Ravens stole Earl Thomas away from the Chiefs the next day. Earl Thomas was on his way to Kansas City on a 1-year deal, and on his way to go get on a private jet to go to Kansas City to go sign his contract. The Ravens say, Odell Beckham came to the division. We need to sign Earl Thomas. Guess what? Odell Beckham didn't end up mattering in the grand scheme of things, and Earl Thomas didn't work out. So that's just an example. It doesn't mean every reactionary signing or thing like that is a bad thing, but to say we're not doing enough, we have to panic is desperate, and it's getting away from your process and going away from, the details and structure that you believe in and your moral code as a football team and an organization and personnel decision makers. So I don't know. It takes a lot to win a Super Bowl. You can do everything right like the Bills, have great signings, great value, and not make it out of the divisional round, just like the Ravens did in 2019 when they had 9 All-Pro players and were the toast of the town and got embarrassed at home. So football is a fickle sport. You can do it all right on paper, but if it was played on paper, the Browns might be 3-time Super Bowl champs by now.
Yeah, and I know as we've talked about, Spencer, this is a what have you done for me now lately league, and that's on the field, but it also seems off of it too, where you talked about it. People want to see the moves right now, but if you're talking about overpaying for somebody, like if the Ravens gave Christian Kirk the deal that he got from Jacksonville, for example, I know that wasn't in the realm for them, but it's those kinds of moves where it's like, oh, cool, the X team spent money, but where's that going to be in a year, in 2 years? So it's about being smart with your money, making sure that you have good decisions that can help you in the short term, but can also extend into the long term, like a Marcus Williams. So, the Ravens have had success doing that. And while obviously the playoff success hasn't been there over these last handful of seasons, that's an area they definitely have to improve in. This isn't necessarily a year where they have to say, all right, we're blowing all of our cap, we're spending all our draft picks and trading all our draft picks for a star. And then if it doesn't work out, well, we're back to the drawing board. And that's that. The Ravens have built this roster continually. And my big thing is to not be complacent. And to me, signing a Marcus Williams is the Ravens not being complacent and not running it back with the exact same roster. Now, I think they do have to make a couple more moves, but that doesn't mean necessarily going out there and signing 3 guys to $50 million contracts. That you can make that borderline splash, like a second borderline splash, like as a JC Treader. Maybe it's Bobby Wagner. Maybe it's something else. But, don't do that and just throw the bag and say, all right, we're going to give you all of our assets. There's something that goes into being smart with your money and making big moves, and then not being smart with your money and making big moves. One of those paths can lead to long-term success. The other one of those paths could lead to 1-year success and then not a lot of long-term success after that. So the AFC is very talented. The Ravens, I still think, have to keep up with the AFC, but that doesn't necessarily mean matching move for move with every single AFC team, because if the Ravens are chasing that, it goes away from what they have been known to do. I think that, they shouldn't be necessarily 100% stuck in their ways, but they shouldn't have to necessarily bend over backwards for somebody who, the team that is making these moves for them. I think the Ravens should stick to what they have been successful with while also making adjustments to that and being able to make solid moves while being aggressive and also being a bit conservative with their money and saying, look, we're not going to throw all these guarantees and all these late back half cap hits to players, because that just gets you into trouble down the line. You mentioned uncertainties with Ronnie Stanley. Got injured, 4 days after he signed that $100 million extension. So, if he's not able to get back to that all-pro level, we saw what the knee injury to Matt Skura did to his career. Knock on wood, Ronnie Stanley comes back healthy. But as you talked about, Spencer, those are decisions you have to make in that moment when what's going to happen with the Stanley, what's going to happen with a Lamar Jackson. So all really good points there. But that's all I have for you here today, Spencer. Thank you so much for joining me here again today. When we get back next week, maybe the Ravens will have made that borderline splash move. And who knows, maybe it'll be JC Tretter or Bobby Wagner, or maybe a surprise trade.
Certainly could be. Thank you so much for having me on, Kevin. Make sure to reward Kevin with the 5 stars and share this podcast with a friend. Reward the man who gives you the best daily Ravens coverage. Thanks again, Kevin, and I'll talk to you guys next week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Spencer. And of course, as always, the link to Spencer's Twitter, his work, will be in the description below. So be sure to go check it out. But that's all I have you here today on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into a mailbag. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.